Anybody have a free beer, by the way, yet? Yes? Free beer?
I was going to get one, but it's broken down.
The beer's broken down? You just drink out of the keg. I think that's just a GrrCON thing. But yeah, it's not wrong. Not with these kind of people. So welcome, everybody, to the afternoon session at GrrCON 2019. So I'm Ron. Introducing Chris Russell. He's going to talk about the past, present, and future of cyber threats for about the next 25 minutes or so. Chris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? In the back? Perfect. All right, so we're going to start off with the past of cyber threats, a little history lesson. So the threat landscape has evolved over the years. Starting in the 80s and 90s, we saw the first types of computer viruses infecting what was, at the time was a pretty small platform of systems in the world. That quickly evolved into worm outbreaks in the 2000s, where they were much more able to quickly spread, their attack platforms via the worming capabilities or mass mailing capabilities or techniques used to spread over the network, things of that nature. In 2003, we saw that evolve into spam and mass mailers. 2004, spyware started to hit the scene. 2005, we saw intelligent botnets. 2007, we saw web threats coming down, so things like malvertisements, malicious URLs, malicious website content, etc. In 2010, we started to see target attacks with advanced persistent threats. In 2012, with the advent of mobile phones and mobile devices, we saw mobile attacks start to hit the landscape. In 2015, ransomware. So for most of us, when we hear ransomware, we think, okay, this is a pretty big issue now. It's hard to think that, even 4 years ago, ransomware just hit the scene. That's how damaging and prevalent it is even today. 2016, BEC, or business email compromise, hit the scene. 2017, we started to see attacks on IoT and IIoT. And then 2018, we saw cryptocurrency mining. In 2019, even though the year's not over yet, we've seen a massive resurgence of ransomware, more sophisticated ransomware attacks tied in with social engineering harvesting to make those attacks more effective and prevalent. So in 1988, we saw the Morris worm wreak havoc with its denial of service attack and propagation mechanisms, reportedly crashing 10% of computers on the internet at the time. It was one of the first to significantly affect the then nascent backbone of the internet. In 1989, we saw the AIDS Trojan. It was arguably the first piece of ransomware. Its creators distributed 20,000 floppy disk copies of the Trojan to attendees of the World Health Organization AIDS conference. In 1990, polymorphic viruses first emerged in the form of Chameleon, created by its author by building on the earlier Vienna and Cascade viruses' capabilities. In 1992, the Michelangelo virus creates cybersecurity panic, since it was expected to cause significant damage. In reality, it didn't. In 1999, the infamous Melissa macrovirus was released, eventually causing over $80 million in damage worldwide. Melissa placed heavy burden on email servers, incessantly emailing itself to unwitting recipients. In 2000, the I Love You, or Love Bug, or Love Letter worm demonstrates the adverse impact of social engineering, enticing victims with a seemingly heartwarming missive. So this was kind of our first social engineering / malware attack, and today, still very prevalent. In 2003, we started to see backdoors and worms become more endemic. As more security flaws were reported, DOS attacks become large scale, so much so that one worm, SQL Slammer, hits more than 75,000 computers in just 10 minutes. The blaster worm makes headlines when it disrupts some of the government services in the U.S. state of Maryland. 2005, mobile malware starts gaining traction against Symbian devices. Most are offshoots of the proof of concept Cabber that was released the year before. ComWarrior becomes the first mobile phone virus that spreads through multimedia messaging services. In 2007, Stormworm emerges, combining the tactics of a worm, a Trojan, and a botnet. At its peak, it accounts for 8% of all malware infections, becoming one of the most prolific threats of 2007 and 2008. In November of 2008, Conficker, aka DANAD, worms its way into as many as 9 million vulnerable computers, spawning several variants and picking up new tricks in the process. Most of you probably are well aware this is still very prevalent on many machines worldwide. 2008 is when that first hit the scene. It's amazing that it's still out there. 2010, StuckNet comes into view. It's the first worm to target supervisory control and data acquisition SCADA systems, prompting discussions on securing industrial infrastructure. In 2012, targeted attacks and data breaches become more common. The Middle East targeting Flame Data Stealer and Wiper come to light, taking cues from StuckNet's modus distract affects the workstations of an oil firm. 2013, a rash of spam emails start delivering the CryptoLocker ransomware, one of the first to scramble the infected system's file and take them hostage. CryptoLocker's operators reportedly earn millions. Today, it's more like billions. 2015, data breaches become more potent, affecting the healthcare industry the most with the exposure of more than 90 million patient records. A bevy of zero-day vulnerabilities are dumped and then weaponized in cyber espionage campaigns. 2016, by this time, business email compromise schemes have caused over $3 billion in global losses. More zero-day vulnerabilities are uncovered and disclosed. 2017, cryptocurrency mining becomes the most prevalent network event in devices connected to home routers. Right now, so the good, more than 48 billion threats have been blocked. Access to exploit kits have dropped by 63%. Ransomware-related threat components dropped by 91%. Distribution of critical rated vulnerabilities dropped to 18% from 25%. The bad, cryptocurrency mining detections increased 237%. Business email compromise attempts increased 28%. Fileless threats rose 474%, and industrial control system vulnerabilities rose 224%. So right now, cyber criminals are casting a wider phishing net. So we all know the first phase of any attack is going to be typically an email attack where they're trying to get credentials from a user or get them to go to a malicious site or execute a malicious file. And that's continuing to become more prevalent. Phishing has been traditionally associated with email, but recent attacks have also been used other modes of communication such as chat, SMS, voice calls. Phishing methods have also diversified the use of encrypted sites to go after Apple IDs, for example, the use of deceptive Punycode technique for SMS-enabled phishing, and the use of hijacked email accounts to respond to an existing email thread. Ransomware-related detections dropped, but profits to be gained relative to the effort to be spent in launching an attack remained compelling, so we continue to see interesting, if not new, ransomware tactics, such as fake software sharing sites and pop-up ads, ransomware bundled with legitimate software, ransomware programmed to send a copy of itself to an infected user's email contacts, and WannaCry numbers persisted because of the effectivity of its underlying exploit. Eternal Blue, and because users might have not patched or were unable to patch despite the fix had been available for over a year. We still see that today. Many other new variants of ransomware emerged in this year alone. Rio, for example, was a big one, causing many, many millions and sometimes billions of dollars of damage to enterprise. Cryptocurrency mining detections and fileless threats have increased. Even in the underground, cryptocurrency-centric tools and services were being advertised. Cryptocurrency mining malware and cryptocurrency stealing malware, which targets wallets and intercepts the transactions. We aren't seeing this as a consistent threat. This kind of goes in line with the value of Bitcoin, for example. That when there's money to be made, we see an increase in cryptocurrency mining. When the value drops, obviously this drops. 2009 has seen more of an increase or reemergence of ransomware attacks. Exploitation of patch vulnerabilities. So this is still a big one today, and I think everyone in the room can understand that it's very hard for an enterprise to keep their environments patched. A lot of organizations do a good job patching. Some organizations can't patch. Some organizations are very slow to patch. So Even in the underground, cryptocurrency-centric tools and services were being advertised, cryptocurrency mining malware and cryptocurrency stealing malware, which targets these exploits to spread their infections, to breach the systems and get on there, etc. So exploitation of patch vulnerabilities is still huge, even in 2019, and has been for many years. SCADA vulnerabilities soar. So the vulnerabilities of SCADA systems, Stuxnet was one of the first examples of that, and it has continued to soar to this day. It is one of the highest growth attack platforms that we see today. Most of these, we can speculate, are from nation-state type actors trying to attack other nation-states. It's becoming more a government type attack platform than even a for-profit or cybercriminal attack platform. So revamped threats, new abuses. So the Mariah-based malware started infecting routers, I think it was in 2018, and taking over millions of routers around the world, being used for to create botnets, to do denial of service attacks. That continues today. They also can be used for cryptocurrency mining, other types of farming, etc. We saw outbound router events from the Eternal Blue vulnerability. That still is the number one outbound router event we see today, even though that's been patched now for well over a year. So what is the future? So we see an increase, even more so in social engineering via phishing. As state of monoculture declines, exploit kit attacks decline, cybercriminals will use social engineering even more. Most of you are probably familiar with the attack type where a user in your organization, typically a high-profile user, will get a phishing email or a spear phishing email. They're hoping to get the credentials of that user within your organization. Then they'll elevate that attack with that company credential, company email address, to potentially send that over to another user in the organization that has power and authority, perhaps to transfer large sums of money. It's coming from the perhaps CEO. It looks and feels real. It may say, I need a transfer of $50,000 immediately for an emergency capital request. They go ahead and send that. Attack done. The only thing that needed to happen was a spear phishing attack succeeded. They gained that user's credentials. Then they were able to send an email to that other user, and they gained $50,000. And it can be, in much more cases, it's much higher. We've seen examples of one organization transfer to $500,000 via an attack just like that. So that doesn't only apply to email. It can also apply to SMS, chats, SIM jacking. A lot of customers that I see are moving to Office 365, using the built-in chat capabilities of Office 365, the built-in file sharing capabilities of Office 365. That same attack where users' credentials are harvested can then apply to that entire Office 365 workflow, causing even more harm. Sporting events, upcoming elections, socio-political developments will be used as premise for social engineering attacks. So open source intelligence gathering, this kind of ties into what the example I just talked about. So everyone today is on social media, usually or maybe on 5 or 6 different social medias. These threat actors are basically harvesting the information that you're putting out in the public to better attack you or your organization. So that example I use where they're going to craft a message from that hijacked credential. They can find out a lot about that individual from their social media and then craft an attack that really matches what they would really do. So it makes it much more effective. So we see even more of that happening now and moving forward. And of course, artificial intelligence engines are gathering this. So it's not just human intelligence. There are AI engines out there gathering this, tracking users, tracking their destination, their travel, etc. All that's being used to better attack organizations. Automation will be a new wrinkle in business process compromise. More aspects of monitoring and function are conducted through software or online applications. This will also be used in supply chain attacks. We're seeing a big increase in supply chain attacks. I think the first one most of you will recall was the Target breach way back. That was a supply chain attack where they compromised the HVAC vendor and used that to get into the larger Target network, and then from there finish their attack. More techniques to blend in. So we're going to see more living off the land of attackers. This will obviously increase. Use of unconventional file extensions. Less reliance on actual executables, as in the use of fileless components such as PowerShell, scripts and macros, psexec, no file needed. Basically just running something that executes and takes advantage. Digital sign malware, new activation methods. Abuse of email accounts or online storage services and apps. Minimally modifying or infecting legitimate system files. So this is a big one. 99.99% of exploit-based attacks are using known vulnerabilities. That's very true today, and we see that in the future as well. Successful exploit-based attacks will involve vulnerabilities for which patches have been available for weeks or even months, but have not been applied yet. So that's a big number. So most of the attacks we see, 99.99%, aren't using 0 days, aren't using some homebred attack of an exploit that no one knows about. These are all known and patchable. Other techniques. Remember, most threat actors are lazy. Worms will be used to infect more systems, including IoT botnet wars, destructive attacks, and mobile attacks. So some advice on how to prevent. You need a multi-layered approach. Because of all those different types of attacks we talked about, you need a solution or solution set within your organization that can cover all those different bases. So at the entry point, upon arrival, good firewall, good microsegmentation. Example of, I've got a database server that is connected to an app server. The only thing the database server is used for is a database for that app server. Do I need to open that database server up to the entire data center? No, I can microsegment that where, okay, that database server can only talk to that application server, therefore closing the loop on potential infiltration points. Host-based IPS. So the section we talked about where 99.99% of attacks or exploits are from known threats. So if there's a known threat or a known exploit or a known vulnerability, you can't patch it, let's say, or you don't have time to patch it. Use a host-based IPS where the intrusion prevention system is going to identify the network packets associated with that attack, drop the packets, the exploit fails to the attacker, the system appears to be patched. Browser exploit prevention, device control. So Stuxnet, for example, that was using human intelligence, took a USB to the air-gapped systems, plugged it in, loaded the malware, using something like device control. If they would have said, okay, all of our USBs are locked down, or the old school method, fill them with epoxy, whatever is necessary, the Stuxnet attack would have failed. Web reputation, so phishing attacks where they're leveraging malicious URLs, etc. Web reputation can detect and prevent that. Next phase of the attack, so they get through the entry point, they move on to downloading a payload to the disk. So typical anti-malware protection, you want to have multiple layers of detection with your anti-malware solution. So because attacks can come from any variety of ways, we recommend a solution that has pre-execution, machine learning, predictive machine learning, application control. So if you've got some more sensitive workloads in your environment where you want to lock them down so no new applications can even run, we recommend application control for that. Variant protection, file level signatures. So what a lot of people will call traditional detection, file level signatures are still very important. Back to 99.99% of all attacks today are already known. And then next phase of your attack would be, okay, it got through, it got on disk, it was able to install, execute. So we want execution-based scanning, so runtime protection. So runtime machine learning, indicator of attack behavioral analysis, exploit prevention. And then let's say it got through all of those layers of protection and still was able to run and execute. You need to be able to say, okay, I'm identifying that this system has been breached. How do we do that? So we have techniques like web reputation. So if something's reaching out to a command and control server, host IPS. So if something's laterally moving internally within your infrastructure, host IPS can detect and prevent that. Data loss prevention. Maybe they're exfiltrating sensitive data in your organization. Data loss prevention will detect and prevent that as well. And then, because you've got all these different techniques in a solution, we recommend that you go with something that has false positive check. So don't go with a solution that just uses an artificial intelligence engine, for example, and doesn't cross-reference that to, okay, I know this is a good file. I know this is a good site. I don't need to run this through any of these engines. So false positive check is a very important piece of that equation to keep your enterprise moving forward. So this kind of identifies what we just talked about, the different layers of protection, the first line of defense, web and file reputation, exploit prevention, application control, variant protection, filter out the known good, filter out the known bad, move those on to the next generation engines such as pre-execution machine learning, less overhead, less false positive. Look for a solution that has this kind of a structure. What's left? Take it through the runtime engines, behavior analysis, runtime machine learning. Is there anything left we need to scan? Let's go ahead and send it to a custom sandbox, detonate it, determine if it's doing anything malicious, create a pattern on the fly, submit that out to the rest of the organization, protecting them, and patient zero as well. And then, of course, you need a solution at the end of the day. Nobody's going to be perfect. No solution's going to be perfect. If something does breach your organization, you still want to know what's happening. Have a good investigation and response platform where you can identify that you've been breached on day one instead of maybe 6 months later or a year later. Stay educated. So if you're responsible for the security of your organization or maintaining your data centers or whatever it may be, you need to stay up on the latest trends, latest attacks, etc. Is there a patch for this vulnerability? Whatever it may be, using podcasts, blogs, research reports, threat reports, webinars, videos, news articles, etc. If you're an administrator of your organization and you're responsible for employee training, put in a good training program with videos, classes, phishing simulations. Phish your users, right? You go ahead and get them caught with a spear phishing attack that's safe ahead of time so that they don't end up getting caught from a malicious actor. At the end of the day, you can deploy all the layers of protection from a technology perspective. And that scenario that I talked about where if a user gives up their credentials and that threat actor has the keys to the kingdom, unless you can detect the data exfiltration, it's game over. So training is an important piece. Where to invest? So gateways, we talked about how messaging and internet browsing are kind of the first line of defense against most threats. That's where most threats will start. So invest in a messaging and web security solution. Things to look for in a messaging solution: make sure that it has a good platform or engine for socially engineered attack protection, AI and machine learning for detecting, it's a known threat, but they've changed it a little bit, so now it's a new threat. With AI and machine learning, it can actually see a brand new threat that no one's ever seen in the wild before and say, this is close enough to that threat I know about, I'm going to flag this as malicious. That's a very high-level overview of what machine learning does. Embedded URL detection, sandbox attachment support. For web security, look for web reputation, command and control detection, exploit detection, malicious script detection, sandboxing of URLs. Where to invest on the network side. We talked about what if everything gets through, what if we're breached. Breach detection systems, so something that can identify targeted attack behaviors such as infiltration, lateral movement, command and control communications, be able to sandbox, files that aren't prevalent on the internet that we want to make sure are safe before we let them through, and then of course exfiltration. So these are all things that okay, something has gotten through, or maybe someone brought in a BYOD device and it's infected. We want to be able to know that's there before it actually causes a bigger problem. Or if we are breached, we want to make sure we minimize the damage before it turns into a bigger situation. So breach detection can certainly help there. Network-based intrusion prevention system, or IPS. This can provide network-based vulnerability shielding. So that whole scenario we talked about where we can't patch our data center, we've got maybe Windows Server 2003 still running without patches, etc. Network-based IPS can certainly help there. Machine learning, context, and visibility. Where to invest on servers? Obviously, you want a multi-layered approach. And endpoints, same basic thing. We've covered a lot of these bases earlier. And then that's it. Thank you very much.